Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first webinar that we have in the Responsible Dissemination series. My name is Sean Lacey. I am the university's Research Integrity and Compliance Officer, and I'm delighted to be joined by Sinead Hanrahan, our Digital Scholarship Librarian, who's going to take us through giving credit where it is due, a guide to using the contributor roles taxonomy. Now, before I hand over to Sinead, I'm just going to try to set the scene a small bit to why are we even facilitating this type of webinar? What's the purpose? When we look at our research integrity policy, it calls out there are 4 principles that we have in our research integrity policy, namely around accountability, honesty, reliability, and respect. And when it comes to disseminating our outputs, our research outputs, they should be done with accountability, honesty, reliability, and respect. But specifically, when we look at the research integrity policy, it's called out what an unacceptable research practice is in one of them in relation to publications, where publication-related misconduct is where you look at claiming undeserved authorship, where you denied authorship to contributors, where you artificially proliferate publications, or you fail to correct the publication record. And this is called out in our local research integrity policy, which was approved by the Research Council and the Academic Council in 2023. But we're aligned with the National Research Integrity Forum, Ensuring Research Integrity in Ireland, which from 2019, the OECD from 2017, the latest Code of Good Practice in Research Integrity from all European academies in 2023. So what we're saying here in this webinar and what our policy says is not just us, we're aligned with good practice both nationally and internationally. When it comes to our research outputs, our authorship policy. So with the previous slide just touched on in research integrity policy, we also have an authorship policy, and it calls out, look, what is the criteria in order to be named as an author on a research output? And there's 4 criteria. One is where you'd have a substantial contribution to the concept or the design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or the interpretation of data for the work. So there's a lot there, but it's a substantial contribution to at least one of those aspects that are mentioned on that bullet. What contribution is, then this is where Sinead is really going to help us out now in a couple of minutes. But also in our authorship policy, it calls out that along with bullet point 1, we need to be involved in the drafting of the work or revising it critically for important and intellectual content. And so that "and" is important at the end of each one of these. We need to be involved in the final approval of the version to be disseminated, and we need to have an agreement that we're accountable for all aspects of the output. And if we don't meet all 4 of those criteria, well, then we're not eligible to be named as co-authors on an actual publication. And this is called out in our authorship policy. So this is not just us today saying that this is it. This is what we say in our authorship policy. And then you can see on that last slide, this is my last slide because really everyone's here to listen to Sinead. But what I mentioned a couple of times on that last slide is the idea of contribution. So also on our authorship policy, it's called out that when it comes to contribution and even having conversations around publishing or disseminating outputs, this should be done at the early stage of your research. Because if you think with research, you're looking at generating new knowledge. It's only part and parcel that if you look to generate new knowledge, that you would want to disseminate it. So it's not kind of any way too forward thinking to be thinking, look, well, what's our dissemination plan here? Like, what are we aiming to do? So having these conversations at the early stage of a research journey is quite important. Also, to discuss authorship, like what do we constitute as authorship, and to note these decisions at the early stage. Now, this just because a conversation happens at the early stage doesn't mean that it's set in stone. It can change. It can change. Research does evolve. Our best plans may change, but it's to have these conversations at the outset. But then specifically in relation to what we're looking at doing today is in our authorship policy, the university actually recommends the use of CRediT. And CRediT looks to clarify the contributions to research outputs to ensure all contributions are clearly and fairly recognized and recorded. So the university recommends that we are using CRediT. And so for us then, it's a case of it's important to outline, well, what is CRediT? And essentially what CRediT will do is it offers authors, both authors now and contributors, the opportunity to share an accurate and detailed description of their diverse contributions to the disseminated work. Okay, so you can see the importance of CRediT is called out in our authorship policy. Our authorship policy is clearly linked to our research integrity policy. So for us, it's quite important to outline how do you give credit. So I'm delighted to hand over to Sinead Hanrahan, who's going to speak to us on giving credit where it is due, a guide to using the contributor roles taxonomy. Over to you, Sinead. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sean. Just give me 2 seconds now and I'll share my screen. Share. And we'll present. Okay. Thanks again, Sean, for inviting me to talk about credit today. So this is going to be like an introductory session about what credit is, why it's important, and a very brief sort of how to use it. And this is something we'll build upon on a further session about how to really build credit into what you do. So what is credit? So it's called the contributor roles taxonomy, and I think taxonomy is maybe a term that is it's a very librarian term, so it may not be something that somebody's come across before, but it's basically a standard that we use to attribute contributions to research outputs, but it's transparent, which is hugely important, because if we cannot see what people did, then it's very hard for us to build on research. And it's very hard for people to get acknowledgement of the work that they did if it's not transparent and accurate. So that's what credit provides. A lot of people might ask, well, why don't we just name people as authors? Like, what's the big deal? And as Sean outlined there, is that there's actually a very high threshold to meet authorship standards. And as he said, you have to demonstrate that you have made a substantial contribution to the concept, the design of the work, or maybe to the actual acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data. You have to have engaged in the drafting or reviewing of the actual the written document. You have to have given final approval of what is actually going to be disseminated, and you have to have made an agreement that you will be accountable for the work that you are down as an author as. And so if we're thinking about credit and research integrity, 1 and 2 are directly related to credit. 3 and 4, I think, are directly related to research integrity and upholding its principles. So speaking of those principles, accountability, honesty, reliability, and respect. These 4 principles, they're the tenets of research integrity. They're outlined in the European Code of Conduct, which is really the gold standard internationally of what research integrity is and should be, and what research practice that upholds integrity should look like. And the reason they're important is if you conduct your research from start to finish, where you are accountable for the research that you did, you're being honest about the research that is being conducted, and we can rely on you to be accountable and honest, and to be respectful to not just your research participants, but your fellow authors and contributors, and to whoever is going to read your work. If you act in this way, we feel that it is very hard to engage in something like research misconduct or questionable research practices if you're upholding these 4 principles. So, as Sean said, these principles are enshrined in research integrity and publishing policies nationally, internationally, and locally. So again, the European Code of Conduct, the Irish National Statement on Ensuring Research Integrity, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, you'll probably know more as the ICMJE. They have really been integral in terms of establishing what our standards should be in terms of authorship and publishing ethics. COPE, again, another foundational community that both of them in tandem really create the highest standard of what we should expect and strive for when it comes to publishing research. And then, as Sean said, the MTU Research Integrity Policy and the MTU Authorship Policy, again, reiterate and enshrine these principles in the policy. So there is an expectation now within MTU itself of what we expect from our researchers, but then those expectations are in line with national and international policy. We want to be in conversation and upholding national and international policy, because after all, research is international. And if we are upholding international policies, then we can be in international and national conversations when it comes to research. So why are we going to all this trouble? It's, you know, some people might think it's a bit of an effort. It is, and the reason is because of research misconduct. In terms of authorship, there are a lot of them. I didn't want to terrify people really, but some of the ones that we see most of all would be plagiarism, which I think everyone understands. It's the taking or the stealing of someone's ideas, passing them off as your own, and obviously not giving that person credit. Honorary authorship, so this can also be called gift authorship, where you don't meet the threshold for authorship, but the research team names you as an author on a paper because maybe you gave samples or data, maybe you provided some software, you might have reviewed the final manuscript, and it's seen as sort of an exchange, a sort of quid pro quo. You do this for me, I do this for you, and when you need it, you'll do this for me and I'll do this for you. It's sort of that kind of thing. And then ghost authorship, where someone writes the paper, but they didn't conduct the research. And it's sort of, if you think about ghost authorship in terms of traditional publishing, in terms of fiction and non-fiction, it's the same type of idea where somebody else has written the work, has written the output, but they haven't done the work. So there's that's a problem, because they obviously don't understand the research. And all of these are in direct contrast to the four principles. If they are not engaging with the four principles, they are not being honest, they're not being respectful, they are not being accountable. We can't, and they're not being reliable. We cannot rely on these people who are named as authors. If, for example, an issue was identified with a paper where somebody had a query about something on it, no author who engages in any of these, and I use author in quotation marks, no author who engages in any of those three acts there could give any kind of real answer to a question about the nature of the paper or the nature of the research project. And that is a problem for research. We have to be able to rely on each other. We need quick responses. Basically, lying, misconduct, all of that is a poison to research, and it really is to the detriment of everything that we all do when we engage in research. So some people might ask, why is research misconduct a thing? Why is it predominant? Surely people know how to do research well. Well, actually they don't. And if I was to give you figures, it might be shocking in terms of how much they don't know. There's lots of reasons for that. One of the main ones is the research culture that we currently exist in. You might have heard the term publish or perish. What that basically means is that the main currency of progression and advancement in your career in research are publications. And publications are hard to come by, because if you're doing everything correctly, you have to do a great deal of work to get to the point of publication. And some of that work may involve ending up with negative results, which publishers are very reluctant to publish in and of itself. It may mean that a project might go on for years, or you contribute to a project, but you don't meet the threshold for authorship. And there hadn't been any other way to acknowledge contributions that didn't meet authorship guidelines. So there's huge challenges that people who are researchers are facing, and they have to be acknowledged. You know, misconduct has a huge amount of incentives. There's other reasons for it as well. You might come into a lab or a department, and there might be a common practice within that lab or department where you're kind of told, well, look, this is the way things are, this is how we do. And particularly if you are new to our PhD student or new to the institution, you might necessarily know that common practice isn't best practice, that you might know there's anything wrong with it. And to the last point, if you haven't been trained And if the people training you, or maybe your publishers or funders, aren't taking the accountability of the research you produce, there mightn't have been anyone to tell you that those practices aren't acceptable and that it isn't okay to do them. So that's why myself and Sean and our colleagues throughout the university do sessions like this, so that we can provide the training and provide the information so people can make better choices and can produce better, more reliable research. So this is the taxonomy. There's 14 contributions basically outlined that can be that can be utilized and used to describe the work that you have done in a project. It began in 2012, and they continue to try and improve it. I think in particular there is they're looking to maybe look at it at a more disciplinary level, so that they could maybe provide a more not appropriate, but something that is more geared to whatever your discipline. This would be especially related to arts and humanities. I think, if you were someone who your research is a performance, this mightn't fit exactly, but there's still ways to align it. So the idea is to make it as close as you possibly can to the work you do and record what you do as best you can. So the 14 areas are conceptualization, so the idea and the formation of the study itself, the data curation. So that's the management and the collection of the data, maybe cleaning the data, that type of thing, creating the RDM plan, those elements which are hugely important. The formal analysis of the data, what does it mean? How should it be understood? How should it be represented? Funding acquisition, massive part of research, has to be acknowledged. And then you move on to investigation. So who actually conducted the research, the data collection stage of it? Methodology. I would kind of tie this very acutely with the conceptualization to the development and the design of the methodology. It's a massive, massive part of research, maybe one of the most important parts, because that is going to determine the quality of your data, and that is hugely important. Project administration, anyone who's engaged in any type of research project knows there is actually an enormous amount of administration involved in projects, and really a project can live and die on how well it's managed and coordinated. Resources, so did somebody provide you with samples or instrumentation, maybe some computing resources, things like that, basically your tools of analysis. That's those resources. Software, so again, programs that have been created or provided to you to understand that, to understand your data, or maybe to represent your data, whatever it may be. Supervision, very obvious one. Validation, then those people that verify your data, that kind of check it and see that they get that they're getting the same answers that you got. Visualization, so visualizing that data, how to communicate it in a way that others maybe can understand it better. And then writing the original draft and writing and reviewing the draft. Now, I think for a lot of people, they would look at maybe the last 2 points and think that's all that authorship is. But as we have seen throughout, there's a lot more in it. Authorship isn't just writing. It's really the communication of ideas and work that has been done. And you can only really do that if you've been involved in those seriously, substantially, as the word is, in those areas. So how do you record it? So a simple table like the one we see up above here is perfect. What I like to do is call everyone a contributor until the end, because then I will look at the ticks and determine based on those ticks whether they have met the criteria for authorship. So you could do this as a heat map or whatever you wanted to do. Another thing you can do as well, you might have come across it already, but a huge amount of publishers are looking for authorship statements, and they want it according to the CRediT taxonomy. And one handy tool that can help you with that is this one down here, the CRediT generator. So I'm just going to click on that and it should open up. Yeah, there we are. So if you take your table that you have maintained throughout the course of the project, you can come to this site and just scroll down here. So you put down everyone's name that have been involved, the contributors' names, basically. You hit the read list, and they're plugged into a table here for you where you can once again, pop in the details of what they did. I'm just doing this randomly now, so I can generate a table, a statement. Once you have that done, you hit that, and down here you'll see conceptualization, this author, formal analysis, this author, and so on and so forth. And it says here, you can just copy this, and if you need to add in clarification such as, okay, led on conceptualization, or they were a supporter of formal analysis, whatever it is, you can just add that thing there. And that can be very handy for when you are at the submission stage, or just even the recording stage of your research project. So another thing to be aware of is that currently, it's always growing. Over 50 publishers, platforms, and funders have either adopted or integrated CRediT into the work that they do or into their platforms and software. So when we share these slides, you can click on the link that I have there and it will take you to the full list. And it's a very reputable list. It's hugely well-regarded institutions and publishers within research that are in it. Just some of them that I'm pointing out here are Elsevier, Nature, and HRB Open Research, which is the Health Research Board of Ireland's open research platform, and they are fully integrated with CRediT. So if you are someone who has HRB funding, you will be expected to use CRediT basically in terms of reporting on the work and the research you have done. Another one, which, if you, I suppose going forward and going back, ORCID is usually useful. So if we're talking about going back, if you have publications where maybe you didn't record the CRediT, and so it's not kind of openly available or transparent who did what, one thing you can do is go to that record, go to that item in your ORCID record. And if you don't have an ORCID record, I would strongly encourage you to get one and to fill it in, because it is, again, gold standard in terms of being open, transparent on your research activity. And it is hugely interactive in terms of what you can do. I'll show you now in 1 second. But you can see here, so this is a workshop that myself and Sean, with other colleagues from across the country, did 2 years ago nearly. And you can see here, I inputted my contributions to that particular workshop. So you'll see it here. And when I go in and see it, you'll see that when I pop down this bit here, it actually has me down as an author, because I've met the standard of authorship for that particular one. Whereas on this one, I was involved in the writing and reviewing. So I didn't meet the standard for authorship, but that's fine. The work I did contribute is outlined here, and that's perfect. That's like, we want to be able to have a honest and transparent record for research. We want to know what people did. So I'm just going to pop into my ORCID now. Yeah, I'll just sign in. So what you'll see with ORCID is that, like, every single section is like, I can decide what I want to do with it, basically, who can see it, who can't see it, every single bit. So it's hugely adaptable to your needs. And I would encourage you to make as much seen as you can, because again, that's the record. We need to be able to see the record. But just to give you an idea down here, right? So these, oh no, that's funding. So outputs, right? So let's say you wanted to add it. You can just add this manually. So I'm just going to pretend I'm going to put up something. I'm going to skip all of this bit because that's not what we're here for. But just to let you know, you get here to get to contributions. Whatever your contributions are, you add them. investigation, and so on and so forth. And you could add another colleague's contributions here as well if you wanted to, if that's what you wanted to do. I won't save it now because it won't, because I didn't fill in all the bits and pieces. But that's a way for you to do it, and I would strongly urge you to do it on every piece of work that you do, whether it is a traditional output like a publication or something like what myself and Sean are doing right now, which is doing a bit of training. That's going to end up on my ORCID. It's something I'm going to share, and it's something people are going to be able to access openly, and they're going to be able to see very clearly how much I did, how much Sean did, what the purpose was. So that, again, it helps identify what your skill set is, what people can expect from you. And they're really important for you as much as they are for the research record, because it identifies your abilities basically and your experience. So, present, sorry there. We'll pop back to ORCID. So that is ORCID. Next week, at the same time, we're going to be talking about authorship agreements. So putting this into practice and building it into an authorship agreement, which in turn is built into a research plan. If you want to know how to do that, how to kind of have the conversations about that, come back next week. We're going to be talking about that. If you have any questions or just want, whether now or later on, give me a shout. My details will be here. And other than that, just any questions you have now, we can take.
Thanks very much, Sinead. There, just see no questions yet in the chat. So I have two questions, maybe just while just to why maybe others in the room might have a question, and obviously if there's no issues, there's none. The first one, I suppose, look, we'll start. I think one is easy and one is tricky, right? So we'll go with the easy one. I think so. We'll just say, you know, with the contributor role. So there's obviously there's the taxonomy there, and we'll just say I, as a contributor, have, we'll say, done the data curation. I ticked one box. Like, where does the conversation happen to actually, do you know what, Sean? That's not enough to be author. Like,
that happens at the very start of the research project when you create an authorship agreement, a general project agreement, really, I would say. But in this case, specifically to do with authorship, that look, we're using best practice, we're adhering to research integrity best practice on authorship, and we're going to use the CRediT taxonomy to do that. And so we're all in agreement that if this is all you do, you don't meet the criteria, and that's fine. We're going to put you in the acknowledgements, and you can further identify and illustrate that in your own research record through ORCID, or maybe you have another means of the CRIS system or whatever like that, LinkedIn, to acknowledge that. But it's something you do at the very start, ideally.
And so is it that at that starting point where you kind of say, look, if you meet 4 out of these total or 5 out of these total, then really, look, that's what we expect for authorship?
Well, it can't be any random 5. It has to be the concept that the first 2 really have to be met, right? And then they, if those 2 have been met, then the other 2 options have to come in, which is getting the okay on the final draft and accepting the accountability for what may come of the output. So unless you can say that you were there for heavily involved in the conception, design, or the data collection or analysis, and the drafting and or revising of the actual written text, then you don't get to answer the second 2 questions because you haven't met the criteria already. It can't be any random 5, basically, is the answer. It has to be specific.
And when you say the criteria already, that's the criteria that's kind of aligned in our authorship policy?
Our authorship policy, our research integrity policies, anything, and the national and international policies. Because ultimately, as I said earlier, research is an international endeavour, and it's also a communal endeavour. So that means we have to engage in these standards so our research is understood. So when we say, I engaged in the conception of this piece of writing, they need to be able to understand that in South Africa and America and France. you know, conception has to mean the same thing. And that's why we employ something like a standard. So everyone is working off of the same hymn sheet when we're talking about what we did.
Very good, thanks. And just actually to mention there, because I popped it into the chat about ORCID. So I mentioned earlier that in the ownership policy, it does call out what we recognize as contribution. It does call out credit. And ORCID is also called out in our ownership policy as well. So, and that's something that we're encouraged as researchers to engage with. So I popped that into the chat then as well. So I'm delighted that you mentioned the ORCID now, Sinead. So thanks very much for that. So now for the trickier one. AI.
No. At the minute.
So
no. Basically, the way I understand it,
for the purpose
ask
of
the question because
ask the question. And the only reason, because Sinead can really read my mind to where I'm going with this. But if but for the purposes of the recording, so if we engage with a generative AI, we say ChatGPT to help us write the paper, we say the manuscript. Do we and we acknowledge ChatGPT in it? Maybe put it down. Do we feel it's appropriate to put it down as a quarter, I suppose, or acknowledgement? I suppose my question is, what is your opinion on this, Sinead?
It can't be an author because it can't take responsibility. Straightforward, it can't. So if you can't take accountability, if you can't uphold the 4 principles of research integrity, if you can't tick those boxes, then you can't be an author. It's simple as. The other issue is just the huge amount of flaws within AI. The lack of transparency on it. Where did they get the information from? What are they changing it based on? Has the integrity of the piece been upheld by it? Does it make sense? And again, there's no accountability in that if it's not. So if you were a researcher who has employed an AI to quote unquote improve your work, it proved it to what extent? How are we supposed to know that? How are we supposed to know what you did and what the AI did? Particularly if we're only getting the final AI involved element. There's just too many question marks, and I just do not trust the software itself. I'm constantly seeing ways in which it went wrong, but the other morning I saw a lecturer talk about all of her students in her class used the AI and they all got the exact same essay out of it. The exact same essay. So they all put in the same question and it churned up the same essay. So like, I can't trust, personally, I couldn't trust research that is involved in AI right now because I don't know if there's a responsible way to use AI at the moment. And on another side of it, I'm personally concerned about the skills we lose when we engage with AI that are crucial skills to actually upholding research integrity. I don't think we can farm those out. There are things we have to develop and actually develop for something that Sean and I work on a lot is for a virtue. To develop as a virtue, you have to practice, you have to do it. You just have to do the donkey work. It's hugely important. So in short, I wouldn't engage with AI, and I'd be really cautious if somebody handed me a paper to review that had employed AI.
And I suppose a couple of things come to my mind there. So you say responsible, and I think that's very important. We talk about the responsible use of AI. Let's also talk about the ethical use of AI. And then I suppose Sinead basically had no hesitation when she said no there. And I suppose it's always important to kind of say, look, Sinead is not alone with that. Like if you look at the COPE, so I popped the link into the chat, so the Committee on Publication Ethics call out, and I'm going to read it out here at the moment, actually. So call out that AI tools cannot meet the requirements for authorship as they cannot take responsibility for the submitted work. And I think that's, to me, that's quite clear cut when you think about authorship policy. When you think of just things that Sinead has outlined in the last half an hour, like it's quite clear cut there for us. I would think, but again, that's not us just locally. If you look at the COPE guidelines, and there's other ones out there as well, they're quite consistent with that as well. You're going to add something there, Sinead?
No, I'm just going to say, look, we're kind of in limbo with AI. We are just as likely to find colleagues that say it's here, we have to deal with it, we have to find a way to live with it. I'm not convinced yet, but I will acknowledge that that opinion is out there. But when it comes down to it, when I think about data analysis, when I think about interpretation and understanding of a piece of work, I don't see AI being at the races for it, and I would be really, I just don't know why we would give up that value that we add to research as people, as thinking and experience and stuff like that. I would be very slow to give it up, particularly in areas like the social sciences as well, because obviously you brought up the ethics of AI. It's built on stolen information, but also it's built on bias. It's like who created it, how it gathers things, and the information that is out there is also hugely biased. So again, it's a dodgy piece of infrastructure, I think, but I will acknowledge that other people might disagree.
Perfect. Thanks very much for that, Sinead. No questions in the chat there, so I think if there's no questions in the chat, I think it's a good time to close. And I suppose just to kind of flag, and Sinead would have mentioned it at the end there, about that next week we're going to be looking at, we have another webinar, and it looks as start as you mean to go on, including authorship agreements in your research plan. And that will be something that's quite important to discuss. And what that it's one that I'm looking forward to, because it really pulls together the various webinars that we facilitated towards the end of last year and this year in terms of identifying predatory journals, good authorship practices, today about using credit, and how does that all kind of get pulled together in this authorship agreement. So very much looking forward to that one. Thanks, Sinead, for the time to share all the knowledge that you have and the experience that you have using credit. Always very interesting presentation, always great, very nice presentation style, everything like that. So thanks very much, because that takes time. So thanks very much for that, Sinead. And hopefully we'll see everyone back maybe next week as well.
Yeah,
thank you, Sinead. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead.
Thanks, lads.